Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome everybody to the Safina Society Nothing But Facts live stream on a gorgeous Thursday, a final stream of the week, and really the day that closes down the week. Friday is always a unique and special day in terms of our programming. But here, if you're in the area, if you're in the state of New Jersey ever, Central Jersey in specific, Central Jersey is defined as really between Newark down to Princeton. That's usually what the central area is known as. Newark Airport, one of the best airports in the country. It's so small, but it's an internet. It's pretty small. Very easy to navigate, very easy to get to. But Thursdays we stream. Then at 6:30 we have class. We read from the books of Sidi Ahmad Zarruq. Then we pray Isha in the masjid. And then, all this in the masjid, of course. And then we have the night of remembrance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, night of remembrance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in which we recite different salawat on the Messenger, peace be upon him, and we do that for about 20-30 minutes. Okay, so let's take a look at today. What are we talking about? Calamities of the end times. The first calamity that Ibn Kathir mentions, I believe this is so important, it's so wise that he mentions this first. Iftiraq al-ummah ila umam. And this, I have to say, I always worry almost about converts when they come into Islam, because they're going to come upon this calamity first. And this calamity refers to the division in the ummah of Islam. Okay? The division in the ummah, that you're going to get into this ummah, but you're going to find so many different groups. And you fear for the confusion, all right, you fear for the the confusion that someone would fall into. So the first hadith, he's from Ibn Majah. Now, as we read these hadiths, you're going to see the solution too. This is why it's very important to study this, because you're going to see a solution. Omani, you know what you could tell him? You could tell him you can hop on anytime till 2 p.m. and if not, Monday, inshallah. عن أبي هريرة قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم تفرقت اليهود على 71 فرقة وتفرقت أمتي على 73 فرقة. The Jews divided into 71 different sects. The Christians into 72 and the Muslims into 73. Now, some people have a very unique interpretation of this, which I don't think is the truth, but it's an interesting interpretation. They say that it's because the Muslims read more and think more about their religion, and as a result, they have more different groups. Okay, and that the firqa here, it's not necessarily all bad. In other words, it's different opinions, different methodologies, different parties, like activist groups, dawah groups, etc. So that's one possibility. The second one, the second portion of the interpretation is okay. That it does make sense. The idea that there are these groups, but not all of them. It doesn't all imply that they're astray. Okay. They could be firaq, all of within Ahl Sunnah. In other words, this group focuses on dawah. Another group is a firqa that focuses on another issue. Okay? So on and so forth. That's another interpretation. The third is most sensible, is that although the ummah of Islam will divide up into many groups, the misguided sects will always be a small minority. Some of them so insignificant as having even died out. Now 1 or 2 followers. Or lasting 1 or 2 centuries, then dying out. Will be so insignificant. Okay. All right. Some of them will be outside of Islam altogether, because there's a difference between the Prophet saying, as he mentions, the prophecy about people who will believe in another prophet, سَيَكُونُ فِي أُمَّتِي. Okay? There will be people in my ummah who claim that there's a prophet after me. Ala wa la nabiyya ba'di. In truth, there is no prophet after me. So he says about them that they are in the ummah. They're not of the ummah, but they're in it in the sense that they call themselves Muslim. Okay, I could call myself an NBA player all I want. It doesn't make a difference what I say. What matters is my reality. Okay, so they're in the ummah, but they're not of the ummah. So some of these groups are completely outside of Islam, like hadith deniers. Okay, people who believe in a prophet after the messenger, and other kufri groups like different modernist groups who don't believe in miracles or don't believe in the return of Prophet Isa, things like that. All right, they are in the ummah, but they're not of the ummah, and that the group that is on the truth, the one sect or group that is on the truth, is like 85% market share. They got 85% of the ummah. And as a result of that, that group is, most of the Muslims are upon the truth, and the truth is clear, right? So that is another possibility, and that's, I believe, the best of interpretations of that, because that's also what we see in reality. When someone enters Islam, the first thought is not that he joined some weird sect. The first thought is just entered general Islam, as we know it to be. Pray 5 times a day, fast month of Ramadan, give charity, zakat, 2.5% of your savings that you've had for over a year, right? After a certain threshold, that's it, right? Like the basics. So that's usually what comes to mind. So that interpretation is best. Now, why do we have to talk about this? Because sometimes even within Ahl Sunnah, there's confusion. And that confusion can have a very bad blowback on a person. Within Ahl Sunnah, the general Sunnah, which is basically Muslims who are accepting all explicit texts of Quran and Hadith. They're accepting all of it. But their interpretation of it may be right, may be wrong, may be somewhere in between. Okay? What do I mean by in between? In between means different upon. It's not very clear what is the correct interpretation because there's different opinions. In that case, we'd say if it's a valid opinion, it's valid. But we just don't know which one is the most correct. Okay, just like the hadith I just mentioned. Okay, there are different interpretations of that hadith. There's not specifically just one interpretation. So on some matters, they're coming 2 p.m. Great. On some by the way, we have a surprise guest at 2 p.m. Okay, it's somebody none of you know, I guarantee you. Okay, so some interpretations are clearly wrong. But they don't remove a person outside the Sunnah. They're just wrong. We don't say that they're an innovator, okay? Because he didn't reject an explicit verse, just interpreted it incorrectly. All right, and so there's a correct interpretation. There could be something in the middle where the ummah differs on it. All right, so when a person comes upon that, it could cause a confusion. So the Prophet ﷺ gives us guidance. We're reading from Ibn Kathir's Bidayah wa Nihaya here, one of the best compilations on end times calamities. Okay, Anna Sahabata. This is another hadith from Mustadrak al-Hakim. لما سألوه عن الفرقة, when the Sahaba asked the Prophet on this bad news of all these divisions in the Ummah of Islam, so they asked, who is the saved group? Who is on the truth at that time? So many different parties, so many different groups. I'm new in Islam. I don't know what to do. Okay? They said, Men hum? Who are they? قال ما أنا عليه اليوم وأصحابي. What I am upon today, alongside with my companions. Therefore, how do we learn this religion? What the important lesson here is that we learn this religion because the first generation transmitted it properly. That theory, that thesis is so important. And that's where Shiaism is a great undermining of the religion itself, because they're telling you, you can't trust the first generation of Muslims. If I cannot trust the Prophet's very own disciples, companions, students, okay, successors, then who can we trust? If they can't tell us what the religion is, who will? So the premise here, or the conclusion here, is that the first generation of Muslims were all sound, upright testifiers, witnesses, and transmitters. Okay, that is so important because they will go to live on longer after the Prophet and clarify many things and spend time teaching. And they will face many situations that the Prophet ﷺ didn't face and would have never faced. Like what? Like innovation in religion. There can't be innovation in religion in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, because we just asked the Prophet and he'd give us the final word. In the time of Uthman ibn Affan radiallahu ta'ala, definitely in the time of Sayyidina Ali, there were groups of people who came about born after the Prophet that caused a lot of problems and confusion in religion. And you have sects developed where these sects, believe it or not, would say about Sayyidina Ali, would say about the companions, they don't know what they're doing. They're wrong. Okay? And they would lure people into that belief. So the first sect, it was born in the time of, the seeds existed in the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. It came out in the time of Uthman, and it really, came out hard in the time of Sayyidina Ali. We learn how to deal with sects from them. We learn so much about how to manage a nation, how to govern, okay, how to handle tribulations, for example, how to handle natural disasters. There was a great drought. One of the most important things that ever happened in the time of Sayyidina Umar, there was a great drought. He issued a fatwa saying we will not establish the hudud punishments because people's minds are not right. When you're starving, you're dying. And if a woman was to maybe, like they say, do zina because her baby's dying. So Sayyidina Umar is saying, how am I going to judge this woman? Okay, when her baby's dying. Sayyidina Umar is saying that, how am I going to judge a man who may have 10 kids and he went and he stole? So he read into the ruling of Allah a precondition that was not spoken. That's what a mufti does. He reads into the law preconditions. Okay? And that's what he did. So he suspended the corporeal punishments at that time. That's an example of a fatwa given by the companions. So it's so important that a new Muslim gets well acquainted with the lives of the companions because they are an explanation of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet's life is an explanation of the Quran. So you have layers upon layers of explanation of this religion that makes you reach the conclusion that it is crystal clear, layluha kanahariha. Its night is like its day. Meaning, in the times of the greatest confusion, it's pretty easy to figure out what the essence of this religion is. Okay? There are a lot of people who are lying these days. A lot of liars. And sometimes they just maybe make genuine mistakes, right? So I told a new Muslim out there, there's a new Muslim on Twitter. His name is Shepherd of the Truth, right? He wears a cowboy hat and he entered Islam. Good for him. I sometimes see his threads and I respond to people there. Some people said, whoa, hold up you with your believing that the Quran is preserved when Uthman ibn Affan, the Khalifa Uthman, he gathered 7 different versions of the Quran. Wow. Look at the hodgepodge confusion that this person, was talking about. Truth of the matter, Sayyidina Uthman gathered 1 mushaf in the spelling of Quraysh. Okay? 1. But because there were no diacriticals and vowels, some of the accents, the dialects, okay, still had room to be recited. Okay? And then he said, here's an example of 2 dialects that have the polar opposite meaning. And he cited Surah Al-Baqarah, in which it says, "Khatam Allahu ala qulubihim wa ala sam'ihim wa ala absarihim." Hold on a second. Hold on, let me just get it for you right quick here. The exact ayah that he cited, so I don't make a mistake. Here. "Fi qulubihim marad فَزَادَهُمُ اللَّهُ مَرَضًا وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ بِمَا كَانُوا يَكْذِبُونَ. They have a great punishment because of how much they lied. Because of what they used to lie about. He then says, no, the next Warsh recites, وَلَهُمْ عَذَابٌ أَلِيمٌ بِمَا كَانُوا يُكَذَّبُونَ. Okay, and this means that they were lied to. So now tell me, how does that make any sense? That Allah is going to say you're punished because you were lied to? So you got it wrong. The Warsh says, بِمَا كَانُوا يُكَذِّبُونَ. يُكَذِّبُونَ. They are going to have a grave punishment for denying the prophets, denying the truth. All that's the same as lying. It's all under the banner of lying. So here you have a brand new Muslim comes in to Islam, and people on Twitter are just causing confusion. It is wajib upon anyone of knowledge to start inserting yourself. Insert yourself. Imam al-Haddad said, oh, scholars, okay? Stop sitting around. Go to the street. Go to the public places. Go to the mosque courtyards. Go and advise the people. Make yourself available. Sit on chairs in the courtyards of the mosque. That's what it used to be like. The masajid would be like an area, a small area that is shaded, then a big area. Sometimes this area had trees. It was a courtyard of the mosque. Okay, maybe some umbrellas, but overall it was open air. And then you had the street, and then usually you had the marketplace. So the masjid was right in the middle of where everyone does their hustle and bustle of life. The scholars would then get a nice big Maharaja style chair and a pillow, and he'd sit on the chair and he'd talk all day, like we're live streaming today. That was a time, Imam al-Haddad said, when the ummah was upon righteousness. The scholars would make themselves available. They go and they talk. A person would pop in, see the sheikh. Oh yeah, I forgot to ask him. How do I do traveler's prayer? Oh, I forgot to ask him this ayah or that ayah that I was confused about. Oh, I forgot to ask him this. I need to ask him that. And he'd go in and he'd talk. A lot of times, they would sit between Maghrib and Isha with some lights, and they would have their seat in the shaded area or right outside the shaded area between Maghrib and Isha, and sit the whole time, 2-3 hours every single day. And some masajid were so big that they would have multiple chairs, and they would just have at one pillar is a sheikh, another pillar is a sheikh, and each was giving either specific lessons, classes, or general talk to the general public. And the way of the ummah used to be that the specific classes that sort of like you're training scholars happen in separate buildings. And in the mosque would be the general public preaching, which is wa'adh, general talk, not classes. Okay? So I had to answer this guy. I said, brother, whoever you are, yukathibun is not yukathabun. One has a kasra and one has a fatha. If it has a fatha, it means they were lied to. If it has a kasra, they lied and they denied others. They denied prophets. They denied the truth, which is lying. So don't come and confuse a brand new Muslim that the ahruf, their qira'at, the dialects are saying polar opposite things. And even in situations where it could, for example, refer to a female or a male, it would just mean that it's going back to different pronouns. That's it, right? That's all it is. Going back to a different pronoun. The pronouns going back to a different, the verbs going back to a different noun in the sentence. You have that in Surah Al-Qiyamah. Okay? So there's a lot. Maliki Click just sent me a video that's going around. A lot of views. What does it say? Oh, Christians, be careful. Inside the Kaaba is Baal, the ancient cow god. Are you serious? Are you serious now? But we may laugh it off. You may think, but there is going to be a person who never opens their heart to Islam again because of that. And is that person any less worthy of our time than our own selves? In the sight of Allah, is that not a soul that Allah commanded us to try to give them guidance? We don't convert anyone, but we give guidance. Explain the truth. Okay. Kenneth Leachman, you should, I believe, if you have knowledge, if you're able to benefit people, and it doesn't have to be specialized knowledge, even knowledge of the bare necessities of religion is oftentimes sufficient, given the stuff the Christians are saying about Muslims. And the Christians are on full. There's Amfest. You heard of Amfest? No. Amfest is essentially the conservative, the new generation of conservatives. All of them hate Islam. They hate Islam so much, every single one of them. Okay, it's happening in Phoenix, Arizona this year. It's like the top 30. Patrick Bet-David is on the headline, right? The top 30 conservatives in the country and in Europe. Okay, these are the top Islam haters in the world. Them and their minions. They have followers. They have millions upon millions of followers spreading all sorts of nonsense, all sorts of lies, all sorts of falsehoods about Islam. And some of them, they go and research and they try to find, things that would drive a Christian away. Okay? The Prophet ﷺ said, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ, okay, by the one in whose soul is my hand. لَتَرْكَبُنَّ سَنَنَ مَنْ كَانَ قَبْلَكُمْ مِثْلًا بِمِثْلٍ. You will follow the path of those before you. So, Christians, they had the big split. You'll have splits. Jews, you have Reformed Judaism. We have progressive Muslims. By the way, progressive Muslims, don't worry about them. They always die out. They come, they cause trouble for 5, 6, 7 years. They die out. Where do they go? Someone the other day made a list of all the progressives, and I remember every single one of them was, we considered him like a major threat to the Ummah, or to the English-speaking Muslim community. All of them are gone. None of them, not one of them, has any influence anymore. They're complete zeros right now. Allah washes them away for the sake of the Ummah. But when does He wash them away? When that Ummah is worthy. That Ummah here meaning that small community is worthy of being helped. Okay? When we fight back, you may not be able to defeat them, but fight back, and then Allah takes care of the rest. You know who Allah took care of? The Perennialists. There's a generation, they don't even know who they are anymore. The Perennialists out of Washington, D.C. used to be a big threat. They had a lot of clout in the university world, and they wrote a lot of nice books, and they started to seep into Islamic conferences. And their ideas were, people were saying, calling them shuyukh and stuff, when their aqidah is kufr, direct. Salvation can occur through the mystical paths of certain Christian saints and even Hindus, and right? They love Christians and Hindus. They don't like Jews because the Jews don't want anything to do with them. The Jews know better. But the Perennialists, they had their top figures, and they were. It wasn't like a group. The philosophy was called the perennial philosophy, but they had their little cult, and they used to have hadras. Right? And they used to have hadras, yeah. And they used to have a second a layer of young leaders, okay? I'm not going to mention names. I don't know who made Toba, who didn't. But they were all based around Washington, D.C. and different universities. Well, they came out and they really got into the mainstream of the community with their book. Right? Come and sit. They got into the mainstream of the community, and they were fought back. Nobody could stop them. It's a free country. You can't stop them unless you maybe do some extra legal techniques, like hiring influencers, also known as sometimes as bouncers. Okay? Sit here. Hire some bouncers and intimidate people. That's not really our way. I personally don't mind that way, to be honest with you. I don't mind it, but it's not our way. It's not something that we do. You hire like, I once had an apartment and the guys wouldn't open up so that we could sell the apartment and show buyers. So you're delaying the sale of the apartment. So I hired a bouncer from a club right here in New Brunswick, right? I hired the guy. I sent him $50 and I said, just don't break the law. I'm not in the mood for a lawsuit, right? And he said, no, I've been an influencer for 25 years. I said, what? An influencer? That's what he calls himself. I influence people to change their behavior. Okay? He goes in, breaks a couple things, punches a hole in the wall, something like that, scares the lights out of people. That's a fast route of doing things. Like, we don't do that stuff, right? Sometimes I feel like, why don't we just do that and get it over with, right? But anyway, we can't stop them. They talk as much as they want. We couldn't stop them. All we could do is post about it and try to talk to people that it's kufr. It's not Islam. Well, guess what happened? We didn't stop them, but I believe Allah found our little community worthy of help. They had such a nasty and miserable crisis. I'm not going to give you the details, but they blew up internally. And many, I heard all of the lieutenants, all the second gen lieutenants, the young guys in their 40s, they all left the older leaderships and the big leader at the top. They all left him. They had a huge crisis and a scandal within. Some of them made Tawbah and just became regular Sunni Muslims after that. And others, I don't know their belief in their position. They may have stayed on the perennial philosophy, but they broke up as a group. This group came in. They were misguiding people. Some Muslims fought back. Then Allah found us, I hope, worthy of being helped. And he broke it up. We could have never done that. We could have never broken that group up. In fact, probably when we fought them, they got stronger because they're now being talked about, they're being fought. But Allah clarifies the truth if the people are fighting for it. And that's the key. So you will follow the paths of those who came before you. But if the Muslims would fight for their faith and fight for their belief, then Allah helps them and breaks up these groups in ways that we could never do. Okay? And this is where he says, Inna ummati, this is hadith from Anas ibn Malik, Inna ummati la tajtami'u ala dalalatin. So guys, we're on the first fitna of Akhir Zaman, is the breakup of the ummah into little groups and how to handle it. Firstly, the interpretation of that, which we covered, and now how does a person handle this? That's actually the first fitna of Akhir Zaman. If you think about it, as soon as you walk into Islam, you walk into like a war zone sometimes. And if you go on Twitter, if Twitter is the only place that you're learning Islam, I feel sorry for you. It's literally a war zone. I love what Paul Williams said. He said that most of communication is nonverbal, right? Like you can get good vibes from somebody with no words spoken. But Twitter, it's not only not just purely verbal, it's not even verbal, it's just typed. Do you ever get a text from someone who doesn't speak English? It sounds very rude sometimes, right? They just don't know English that well, okay? Inna ummati la tajtami'u ala dalala. My ummah will never come to all agree upon a misguidance. What's a misguidance? The rejection. Okay? They will never come to agree upon that. Why? Because it's explicit. It's very clear what it means. فَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الْإِخْتِلَافَ فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالسَّوَادِ الْأَعْظَمِ. That's in theology and law. But dalala is also oppression in the world. Okay? Oppression in the world, such as an oppressive policy, an oppressive war, things like that. A rebellion that's oppressive, all those things. Okay? So, فَإِذَا رَأَيْتُمُ الْإِخْتِلَافَ فَعَلَيْكُمْ بِالسَّوَادِ الْأَعْظَمِ. Once you see ikhtilaf, once you see argumentation, leave the argumentation and go into what is accepted by everybody. Okay? And we saw some of that sentiment yesterday, where if you want to last long in this ummah, you can have positions and opinions on mukhtalaf fihi masail, but that should not be really the bulk of your worldview. That should not be the central part of your worldview. And it should not be the screen, the litmus test of who you hang out with and the brotherhood of the ummah. Should not be. Okay? There are things that are mukhtalaf fihi. You should not be so emotionally attached to that which is different upon. You should be emotionally attached with that which is absolutely crystal clear as part of our religion. And whoever agrees with that, that's our brotherhood right there. And then the brotherhood will have degrees. Like 75% on all that we agree upon, that every Muslim. Then the mukhtalaf fihi, clearly if they have share opinions, you're going to have more in common. Okay? So that's extremely important. As-sawad al-a'zam, the black mass. So many people that it just looks like a black mass. Like when you look at a march from a aerial view, all you just see is black, right? Meaning the shadows and the amount of people. All right. Some say this hadith is da'if because Mu'an ibn Rifa'a as-Salami قد ضعفه غير واحد من الأمة. Here's another one. I shared a sign of the Prophet, peace be upon him, a prophecy of the Messenger, peace be upon him, to a new Muslim. Someone who's trying to, doesn't like that he became Muslim, said, be careful, Muslims have a lot of fabricated hadith. Like, where did you even get that term from? That term came from the Muslims because they themselves are the biggest referees for fabricated hadiths, right? No one says, oh, be careful, the Bible has fabricated verses, right? Because you guys don't have that concept. You don't have that concept of monitoring, oh, this is a fabricated story from Jesus. They have no concept of that at all. And if they did, which the academics do, it applies very badly. The whole thing is fabricated. Okay? The whole book has been altered. Next. عليكم بالسواد الأعظم الحق وأهله. وقد كان الإمام أحمد يقول السواد الأعظم محمد بن أسلم الطوسي. وقد كان أهل الحق في الصدر الأول هم أكثر الأمة. Okay. فكان لا يوجد فيهم مبتدع لا في الأقوال ولا الأفعال. وفي الأعصار المتأخرة فقد يجتمع الجم الغفير على بدعة. Okay. So when we say that the ummah will never gather upon a misguidance, you can retort and say, how about Iran? The whole country is upon a misguidance. So we're saying the ummah. Iran is not the whole ummah. You have to zoom out and look at the entire ummah. That's number one. And number two, you have to zoom out in history. Okay? In history, you have to account for all the scholarly opinions throughout history too. That's why knowledge is so important. So we can go back into the books of history and we could start seeing, hold on, it seems generation after generation, all the scholars were of this interpretation of something. That's probably what was the truth, right? So it's extremely important to recognize that. All right. That's why it's important to learn how to read, and that's why it's important to hit the books. You got to have books, and you got to be opening these books all the time. It keeps you sharp, and it keeps you connected with your historical ummah, not just today. Like, for example, Christian Zionism. Christian Zionism is something that would have never lasted if the Christians of that time, measured their theologians by the past. We measure our theologians by the past. If a theologian comes and say, hey, guess what, guys? Evolution's actually okay. I discovered it. I worked it out. He'd get laughed at, right? Because you're not going to change the essentials like that. We're going to go back and we're going to see if anybody ever said this. That's why the modernists, they make a big fuss for about 5 years, and then everyone realizes that they're lying, or that there's no support and there was no proof. Okay. So he was saying in the early times, it was very rare to find an innovator. In the later times, you could find plenty of innovators, and you find big groups of innovators. So the issue is that they're not the ummah. Zoom out for the whole ummah, and zoom out through history. Okay. Now what happens, here's the next piece of advice. الأزمان he says here كما قال في حديث حذيفة فإن لم يكن لهم إمام ولا جماعة. Hudhayfa then says, O Messenger of Allah, you command us in times of confusion, follow the Khalifa, follow the king, follow the Sultan, follow the imams, all same meaning. Follow the leader of your country, of your area. Hudhayfa says, what if they don't have an imam? The Prophet ﷺ said, then follow the jama'ah. Like we're a people that don't have an imam. Is there one official imam of the Muslims of New Jersey or of America? No. So we just follow the jama'ah. All right, but in some cases, probably you go back in 1980, there was no jama'ah here, right? You couldn't say that there's a mainstream group, right? So Hudhayfa says, فَإِن لَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُمْ إِمَامٌ وَلَا جَمَاعَةٌ. What if there's no imam and there's no jama'ah? Jama'ah means a group, the mass group, the mainstream group. قال له فاعتزل تلك الفرق كلها. Leave off all these groups. If you go to a country and there's a civil war in the country and the Muslims are all divvied up, some are on this side, some are on that side. You see good shuyukh on one side, good shuyukh on another side, and you're totally confused. And you can't even hang out with them because the fitna is so raging so fiercely that if you were to go and let's say, oh, let me go spend the night with in this mosque with those people, all they talk about is the fitna and they want to check your opinion. They won't let you sit with them unless you're with them on the civil war. Right? Then you say, all right, let me go to another masjid. And they do the same thing. So they won't leave you without taking a position. And you don't know genuinely what is the truth and what is false. At that time, the Prophet ﷺ, for that example, in that situation, فَاعْتَزِلْ تِلْكَ الْفِرَقَ كُلَّهَا. Leave off all those groups. Okay? Leave off all those groups. حَتَّى okay. وَلَوْ أَن تَعَضَّ بِأَصْلِ الشَّجَرَةِ. Even if you have to bite down on the roots of a tree. Why would you have to do that? Because I'm so tempted to go out there and be part of this. Okay? I'm so tempted. He says, bite down on the root of a tree so that you don't get tempted to be part of this fitna. Okay. حَتَّى يُدْرِكَكَ الْمَوْتُ وَأَنْتَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ. Until you die upon that. Remember, sometimes we ask ourselves, where are we going? A lot of times our direction in life is to find the right track, the right path, and stay on it till you die. That's your job. If you're someone who studies knowledge, who does dhikr and strives to avoid sins, and you do a little bit of dawah in your life, and you help out in your community, and you raise your kids and your family, your general life purpose is to stick upon that until you die. Right? Stay on that till you die. And when one of your companions dies upon that, that's great success. Hope they go to Jannah on that. وتقدم الحديث الصحيح بدأ الإسلام غريبا وسيعود غريبا كما بدأ. How do we reconcile that? The Prophet ﷺ saying that the Jama'ah will never be upon a misguidance, and the Prophet saying Islam began as a strange thing and will return to be strange. Because in small contexts, in small situations, Islam may be strange. Namely, how many young people have made tawbah? They go home and they're mocked, they're made fun of, they're laughed at. Like yesterday, I had a person say to me, all they started doing is saying, inshallah. They get made fun of for that in their homes. All right, our guest is here. Okay, bismillah, let's do it. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a guest that we've been trying to have on for a while, and we're happy to have on. And you all know that I've been basically back to comparative religion days and have been trying to get to the root of the difference between Judaism and Zionism and trying to see why is it and how is it that these Zionists, they're not religious people. They're atheists, right? And yet some of the most religious of Jewish leaders and communities have nothing to do with racism. and we've been lucky to have someone reach out to someone willing to talk to us about this. Okay. Rabbi Yisroel Dovid Weiss is our guest right now. He's from the Neturei Karta. It's like I guess we're gonna find out. We're gonna ask him. I guess it's like a group. I think they're sometimes operate like tariqas. In our world, tariqas like have one major rabbi and then he's the leader. We're gonna find out right now. All right, welcome to the Sefina Society program, Rabbi Yisroel Dovid. Welcome to the program. How are you today? Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I pray to the Almighty to bestow upon me His truth, His wisdom, that I may be worthy of conveying His message, and so sanctify His name and bring peace to the world, inshallah.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Firstly, can you help us understand, in the Hasidic world, do they all Hasidic groups operate that they have one main rabbi that is their leader, and then they have maybe the next generation of leaders? Is that how Hasidic groups operate?
Well, with the help of the Almighty, the Hasidus, it started around 300 years ago or so, and it was a great rabbi, a very holy man who had a certain style of uniqueness in his worshiping of the Almighty. That said, I mean, we all have the same Torah, the same, the covenant that we made with the Almighty 3,000 years ago. And but there are certain times that certain rabbis have their points or issues in Judaism that they stress with sort of in a manner more than maybe others. The Baal Shem Tov was well known for as his spirituality. People like to sort of explain it as that they was deep in song and issues of song and melody or whatever. But that's all. I mean, we don't look at it like that at all. I mean, it's just writers write these things, and it's a very spiritual, it's a very deep spiritual style, which is hard because spirituality is intangible. So it's hard to really, even if we do understand, which we don't feel that we really comprehend entirely the depth. It was a metaphysical, spiritual issues that he had, and he had a lot of students, very great holy people, scholars, very great scholars, and then sort of like you said, these students had their body of students, each one individually, and so today you will have different groups of Hasidim that go under certain, certain titles, certain names, following certain rabbis. Some of them come from, or the majority maybe come from a dynasty of rabbis that went back to either for the students or students of this Baal Shem Tov. The Hasidim, all of them eventually go back to that root of the Rabbi Yisroel Baal Shem Tov. Baal Shem Tov means the owner of the good name. Shem means the name, Tov, the good name, because his service was the spirituality was given that maybe because of the holiness, the spirituality, good name, or the connection with the Almighty, the good name, whatever it was. The followers they call Hasidim. Hasidim means actually means a person of righteousness. There's going to doing the laws of the Torah, and then Chassid means that he does above and beyond. He does more than is required. That's what the word Chassid means actually. So he does more than that, like above the necessities. And so this group was called Hasidim. There are many Hasidim today in the United States, different groups. As a general rule, you will find in the world the Hasidim are not Zionists. They are and they're more outspoken a lot of times about their connection to the Almighty and their religion. They're more in their dress. You can see their religiosity, the facts that they're serving the Almighty in their modesty of dress, and as far as the women go and as far as the men go. They wear a certain garb, or a lot of them have, like I have, it's called payas, earlocks, and beards, and there's certain garb, and a lot of them would be very outspoken against Zionism. So, and that I would, with God's help, I'll explain just the difference a little between Judaism and Zionism, that it should be understood.
Great. Now, are the different groups, or can they be termed just groups or orders? Are they what's the best way to term them, to just discuss them?
As groups, or what was the second you mentioned?
Orders?
Orders? No,
Yeah.
it's like it would be maybe I believe groups. So it would be, I think, more,
Okay.
more fitting. But it's I won't say that with a certainty. It's there's certain, usually like certain customs, certain traditions they're following differently one from the other, certain but almost it's very, very similar. Most of them are very, very similar, but like yeah, there's nuance differences, and some of them have a little more of a difference in garb, whatever. I mean, like, but for the outside, you wouldn't even notice. Maybe some of them you would recognize the difference in dress or something. But as a general rule, the fact it would be that the women dress more modestly, the men dress in a certain distinctive garb, like long coats and beards and payas, that you will find as a general, almost entirely across the spectrum of Hasidim.
Great. If for those joining us on Instagram, if you want to see the full screen, hop over to the YouTube channel, Sefina Society, and you'll be able to see both of us. You'll also be able to put in your comments and questions, which we may take one or two questions at the end. Now, can you tell us a bit about the origin, the name of your group, Neturei Karta, if I'm pronouncing it correctly?
Right.
It doesn't sound Hebrew. It sounds Japanese or something. So
you're very right. It happens to be Aramaic.
Aramaic, okay.
And Neturei means protectors. Karta means of the city. And the name was actually given in the 30s because it came originally from the Talmud, which is the oral law that was given to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, when he went out on Mount Sinai, when we made this covenant 3,000 years ago. He was given the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, and there's 613 commandments, and many of them are written very concise. It says you have to you're not allowed to eat you're not allowed to mix meat in dairy or something, but it's mentioned 3 times in the Torah, and it's very, very short. It's very concise, very tersely written. And so in order to be able to explain all the laws that are bound, that a Jew is bound to in regard to each individual commandment, there's many branches, many different things. So it was explained orally to Moses, all these laws. The Sabbath is what God created the world 6 days. The 7th day He rested. So we have the Sabbath. Now the Sabbath is just 39 laws of prohibitions that we're not allowed to do, and these are all derived and everything. The Talmud explains how each one individually, how it comes. So if without the oral law, we cannot practice the Torah. You can't be a practicing Jew without the oral law, and that was given to Moses orally, and it was passed down to his student Yeshua,
which is the Talmud.
Yeah, to today. That's basic. That's the 101 of Judaism. Yeah. So in the Talmud, it's like a massive. It's many volumes where it's speaking. It's compiling all the different explanations of all the laws, and also a lot of the work explaining the prophecies from the prophets that followed after Moshe Rabbeinu, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, and all, to explaining, because a lot of all the prophecies were written in metaphors, and it would have to be explained, and also a lot of rebuke and teachings to the Jewish people are in the Talmud. So one of the many things that are mentioned in the Talmud is that a rabbi said to his students that they were traveling to another city. He said, when you come back from that traveling, please tell me who are the Neturei Karta, the protectors of the city that you're going. So they came back and they said, there's soldiers, there's the whatever police. And so he said, no, that's not what I meant. He told them, I want to know who are the scholars and the learned men, the scholars, the holy men, because they are the protectors, they are the Neturei Karta, protectors of the city. So that when Zionism came along and sat itself down on the city of Jerusalem and came into the Holy Land. So the rabbis, they were living, a community of Jews were living there, a nice, sizable community. They were the minority, mind you. The majority were Muslims, and the second largest community were the Christians. And then there was a Jewish community which was also quite large, but it was the minority community. And these were all almost entirely God-fearing people. They were the elite of Jewish society around the world, because as a general rule, through the hundreds of years, it would be rabbis who retired, who would go there to live off their days in holiness. Nobody went there for business usually.
I see.
So it developed into the most elite society of holy people. And so the Jews living there were Jews practicing the religion to the utmost degree. And the world considered, the Jewish world, in fact, would send charity to keep these people supported, because they were sitting and learning. They were not actively in business, and as a general rule. And so this society, then when Zionism came along, which was a group, as I will explain with God's help, of a base nationalist group, a group that were aspiring to create a state and had nothing to do with religion. When these guys came along, so the community that was residing there for these hundreds of years were in total opposition to this, and they spoke out, and they used to put, in those days, what they would do is they would put paste on the walls of the city different decrees and statements of the rabbis. So one of the statements they put up in their fight against this movement of Zionism was a statement of the Talmud, a verse of the Talmud, that it says, "This, who are the Neturei Karta?" This, and excuse me, and that name stuck to the ones who were very vocal against Zionism in the 1930s. So really, there was a lot of people demonstrate. The people stood up and opposed Zionism. Maybe it was already in the 1930s. So you're talking already 50 years, maybe, since Zionism really started trickling into the Holy Land, the Zionist movement, and the people opposed them. But they had different names. It didn't have to necessarily be organizations. It was simply the community, because they were religious Jews. They opposed this movement of Zionism. But and then it became a certain group that was very vocal, was actually the leading governing body of the Jewish community that were living there. It was called Eda Haredis, and it is still called so today. Eda Haredis means, Eda means the community, Haredis means God-fearing. The Eda Haredis, the God-fearing community, Aguda Neturei Karta. It had three actually divisions in it. Eda Haredis, Aguda means together, Neturei Karta. And so this was the ones that took up a very vocal position and strong position against the Zionist movement. And they tried to, as I will explain, they tried to plead with the British when the British mandate, this was after the First World War, it was on the British mandate, they tried to plead with the Britons that they should not be affected by the Zionists, because unbelievably, the Britain came along and they were the backers of this Zionist movement. And because some of them were from Britain, Chaim Weizmann, the first president of Israel, came from Britain, and he was the one who was pivotal in having Britain support the concept of making a so-called Jewish state. And so the British ordered that every Jew has to register under the Zionists when they came. So they had this community that were living there hundreds of years, or thousands of years actually, because it's 2,000 years since the destruction of the temple, and Jews lived there as individuals. And all of a sudden, this group, the Britain, decided that these interlopers, this group of nationalists, heretics, because they were not religious, and that they should have the control of the Jewish community, and people should have to register under that. And the Jewish community fought against that, and they were successful in freeing themselves of having to be registered under the Zionists. But let me just go back a step, really, because we just explain what this is Zionism, talking Zionism, Judaism, what we're talking about here. So with God's help, Judaism is a religion of 3,000 years. It is Moshe Rabbeinu went on Mount Sinai, and God gave him the Torah. The Almighty gave him the Torah, and he took it down to the Jewish people. All the Jews were gathered around there, which means 600,000 men from the age of 20 to 60, and the females and the children and the elders over that. But the ones that were counted were from the age of 20 to 60, the men. So you're talking of over 1 million people, almost probably, we're talking here. And these people stood there and saw how God gave Moses the Torah and said, "I am your God," and we accepted to be subservient to the Almighty and accept to the laws of the Torah will be our laws from the Almighty. So that is the covenant that we made with God, and we're not allowed to stray from that in any manner, shape, or form. So for the 3,000 years, we are strictly adhering to these laws of the Torah. That means that when there's changes in the world, whatever happens, or new things come, inventions, for instance, electricity. So electricity, what about on the Sabbath? It says in the Torah, you're not allowed to make a fire on the Sabbath. So the rabbis start thinking about what, and delving into the issue: is electricity fire? Does it consider something that we're allowed to do on the Sabbath? And of course, the decision was that we're not allowed to use open electric on Sabbath. If we want light on the Sabbath, we have to open the lights prior to the Sabbath, and that's how we have lights on the Sabbath. But we're not allowed to do so. Our lives is totally ruled by the laws of the Torah, and when as the changing in time, we adhere. We try to see that we should adhere to the rules of the Torah, even in the changing of times, no matter what happens. Zionism is a movement of 150 years or so. It's a political movement. It was a movement of Jews who are estranged from the Torah. And just to give you a little more to understand, before Zionism came, it was like 250, 300 years ago, there was the movement called Reform Judaism. Reform, which is the majority, unfortunately, today, Jews are non-religious. They're not Orthodox, what they call. They do not adhere to the rules of the Torah. And what they made, their first claims were, when they started their movement, is, oh, Moses made the Torah, so it's not from God, even though there was never a gap in our history. We're talking over 1 million people. We're people of the book. People wrote books and constantly, and nobody challenged or said that it wasn't true. The fact that we saw God speaking to us, that we heard God say, Anochi Hashem Elokecha, I am your God, and that the Torah was given to Moses from God and that was passed down from generation. There was never a gap. Yet this reform movement started from Moses Mendelssohn. His name should be obliterated. He was the beginning of reform. And he said, we're going to reform because you can pick and choose and do what you want, whatever's convenient, because it's not from God. Anyway, that's how reform started. And the reform was exactly what they say they're going to reform. You can't reform God's word, but they just don't believe it's God's word. Yet they want, in order to give themselves legitimacy, they ordained ministers, what they call rabbis. They made things that's similar to synagogues, but it's also similar to the church. They made the temples. They changed the garb of how the people pray. They put an organ that plays on the Sabbath, which is forbidden for us. And they don't keep the Sabbath. They don't respect the laws of the Sabbath. They don't respect the laws of kosher. All these commands doesn't mean anything by them. They pick what is convenient. Why? They are trying to assimilate. They want to be able. They said they wanted to fit into society where they were living and to be respected instead of being scorned as Jews. And it became very popular, unfortunately. And in order, like I say, that should be accepted, they made it like they're ordaining ministers. So all of a sudden, they became rabbis, even though they are lacking the knowledge of the Torah, and they're certainly not practicing the laws of the Torah. And they gave it a form of legitimacy. And it became, unfortunately, spread like fire. And the majority of the people today are not Orthodox. They don't keep the 10 Commandments, even the Sabbath. So that's basically it. From them, their children and grandchildren, like a generation or two later, were the Zionists. These were people already who were non-practicing as a whole, and they didn't practice the laws, and they had nothing. And they weren't happy with this assimilation project of trying to assimilate, because they said, we still see that the non-Jews sometimes will get drunk or something and say, you dirty Jew, and it wouldn't help the fact that they were trying to just be the same like their non-Jewish neighbors. So that was one of the excuses. They said that they wanted to create a Jewish state, their own homeland, and that way they'll protect themselves with guns and so forth. Now, this whole concept of Zionism could only come out of a non-religious concept, because God warned us. First, he took us out of Egypt. We accepted the Torah 3,000 years ago, and we were told to go into the Holy Land. We went in through miracles. The walls of Jericho sunk. We walked around there, and so it was God's miracle. But God told us we have to be on a very high level of holiness in order to remain as a nation there. And he required of us to build a temple. And King Solomon built a temple. Then there was a second temple later. But basically, it was on the condition that we should be on a very high level of spirituality, of holiness. If we don't remain on that high level of spirituality, then we were warned by God that we will be sent from the land, we will be exiled from the land, and that came about 2,000 years ago. That's a period of 1,000 years we had there in the Holy Land. And then we were dispersed amongst the nations with the destruction of the temple. And we were warned by God through a prophecy of King Solomon that we are forbidden to attempt to return en masse in large numbers, or to try to end exile in any shape or form. And we should not rebel against any nation. So we have 3 prohibitions: not to rebel against nations, not to return en masse, not to attempt to end exile. That's a stringent command of the Almighty, and that's 2,000 years ago. And since then was dispersed amongst the nations, and we suffered Inquisition, that they tried to forcefully convert Jews to Christianity in Europe, and many other trials and tribulations. But our communities never attempted to reestablish a Jewish sovereignty. Why? Because we were warned by God. We are in exile. God is compassionate. He's the ruler of the world. When he sees our suffering, when he feels the time is right, he will end exile, at which time we believe there'll be a metaphysical change in the world. All humanity will recognize one God, not become Jewish, but everybody will believe in one God. They'll stop being atheists. God will then bring us back together, and God himself, the Almighty himself, will build the temple. That's what we believe. So it will be without any human intervention. The whole concept will be a miraculous change in the world. That is the Jewish belief, and we yearn and pray for that closeness to God that we're lacking now. We yearn and pray for the return to the Holy Land, yes, but not on a manner of taking a gun and returning. It's when God, with his compassion, will end this whole worldly concept the way it is today, with a metaphysical change. That's Judaism. Zionism came along, and these were already children of non-practicing Jews, and they came along and said, enough of this even assimilation, and they're not religious anyway. They're going to come and they're going to make their own state. So the rabbis who were there, of course, said to them, what you guys, you can't do this. You can't make your own state. It's forbidden. It's expressly forbidden for Jews. But they laughed. Who are you to say? Well, they didn't look at the rabbis with any respect or anything. They were a group of non-practicing Jews rebelling against God. Some of them didn't even believe in God, or maybe a lot of them didn't believe in God. So this whole concept was a transformation of from Judaism, which means subservience to God, which we strictly had practiced for 3,000 years, into an ersatz Judaism, a nationalism. Now they wanted to make their homeland, these Zionists, in Patagonia and Uganda, different places, because they're looking for a practical place that they should have a lush land, and because it was before the time of technology. So they wanted to have a land that should be productive, and they should be able to create a beautiful country. But then they realized, they had a meeting in Basel, Switzerland in the 1890s, where they said, look, we can't, in order to establish a country, you need the backing of the world, people, or the world powers, and you need a massive amount of support. So they decided, it would be more practical to go to Palestine, although Palestine was not such a lush land, But at the same time, they will be able to piggyback and use the facts that Jews are called the children of Israel, that God gave us the land, and they'll be able to have a narrative and tell the world, hey, you should support us because we're the people of the book, the children of Israel, returning to the land of Israel that God promised us. And the evangelistic Christians, that fits like hand in glove. That's exactly what they want to hear. And they're very happy to support such a thing. So they have millions and millions of Christians who support this concept of Jews returning to the Holy Land. So they realize they can get support. And also, unfortunately, the majority of Jews already were non-religious, and they can turn to them and counting on their ignorance in the Jewish law and playing on their emotions. They could say, hey, every Jew says in his prayers in the Passover Seder that we say the coming year in Jerusalem, the coming year in Jerusalem. So they'll use these concepts and they could say, hey, we're returning to Jerusalem, just like God told us. With the beginning of redemption, they use the concept, with the beginning of God's redemption. Even though the ones who were knowledgeable amongst them knew clearly and very well understood and knew that according to the Torah, we're expressly forbidden to return. And it's not God's redemption. We are supposed to be living in all throughout the world as loyal citizens in every country we reside, praying for the well-being of the country we are. It's a requirement of Judaism. But they didn't care. So Zionism is a transformation from subservience to God to base material nationalism. And on the contrary, they take God out of the equation, because they ignore the fact that we're not allowed to, in fact, make our own, even 1 centimeter, 1 inch of Jewish sovereignty is forbidden since the destruction. But that's God's will, that we should be humbled, we should be subservient and realize we're in exile, and that will cause us to be closer to God and pray and ask for God's compassion. So doing what they're doing is a direct rebellion against God. It's rooted in blasphemy, because their whole concept is like they claim, one of the reasons they claim, I mean, reactions to Satan is driving them to make this state. What do they need it for? They should just stop. They're not Jews practicing Jews anyway, so just do your thing in whatever land you're living. No, but they insist on making this country that they call a Jewish state, and they used it because to be able to sell it to the Christians and so forth. So they use the Star of David, they call it Israel, which is Jacob. But when you ask them, why do you need this? So they say, what do you mean why we need it? Don't you see how much we suffered throughout the history in Europe? So we say, look, we believe in God. Everything is from God. God is compassionate. A tsunami comes from God. An earthquake, a plague, and all the good that comes everything is from God. We turn to God. We look at God to protect us. So you say, you're looking to God to protect you? Where was God? So they spew blasphemy, heresy, and they scorn us, and they laugh at the religious Jew. They say, yeah, you're looking at God. The solution is to take a gun and make your own state and protect yourself. So, and then of course they try to embellish it and conflate Judaism with it to that it should look kosher, it should look good, and they use the facade and they masquerade in the Israel, Star of David, the menorah, all these different things, but the underlying issue is that they scorn and laugh at that religious Jew who looks to God to protect them and says only the Almighty can protect us and is the protector. And so it's rooted in that. Then, unfortunately, being that they made their state in Palestine, so now we have another issue. Because if it would have been in a desolate land and uninhabited, we still would oppose them because we're in exile and we're forbidden to return en masse and make our own country. As individuals, God permitted us to live there under the Ottoman Empire, whoever it may be, as long they gave us permission to live there, these countries, so we can. The Torah permits us. But to go en masse and make a national home, that's forbidden. But being that they decided to make their national home, not in Uganda or Patagonia, but in Palestine, so now they had a technical problem because it was inhabited. There were people living there in hundreds and hundreds of villages and towns and so forth. And when they came along, and they want to establish the state, they had these people who were an impediment to that. They had to get rid of them or somehow. So they tried first buying land. And at the beginning, the Arabs and Muslims sold land to the Jews because they had no problem with the Jewish people. We were living together in the same courtyards. I always show the pictures of how we lived together. I mean, there's everybody, Arab and Muslim and Jew pictures.
Bring that closer there.
Yeah, how we would live together. This is how Jews live together with Muslims in throughout history. I mean, everybody has these pictures. Everybody who lives in a Muslim country, in Iraq, in Tunisia, in Yemen, in Morocco, in any place. I mean, in Lebanon, wherever there were Jewish people, you could still find the synagogues. We lived, and of course in Jerusalem, Al-Quds, wherever it is, Jews live together without any human rights groups to protect us. Because although we have a different religion, a distinctly different religion, but it was never an impediment of coexistence. So this is a fact. And not only that, on top of that, the Jews, when we were being murdered, basically, in Europe by the Inquisition and the Crusades, and throughout history, Jews were embraced and given a safe haven in Muslim countries. So even though we have a distinctly different religion, the Muslims never found a problem with that. On the contrary, they are told by their imams and by the religion that they should protect and respect the Jewish people, and they did. And we flourished in these countries. So now, when the Zionists come along and they decided to create the state, now they have a problem. People, they have people living there. So at the beginning, I said they started buying it. The Muslims had no problem selling Jews homes and everything. But when all of a sudden they became aware that these Jewish people are coming from Europe, they're not just buying homes. They have a plan to create their control over the land. So they stopped. They didn't want to sell to them. And so then the Zionists started attacking them. And for instance, Deir Yasin, the very well known, the horrific massacre in Deir Yasin, where it was a village of friends to the Jews. It was a Muslim residents over there, was very friendly. The Jewish people were the best friends over there with them, and they got along. And these Zionists came in and they massacred Deir Yasin. Our rabbis told us of this. I knew the rabbis of this generation, some who passed on now, and I'm sure there's some people alive still can remember this. And they used to grit their teeth when they talked about it with such pain and sorrow. And this was all what the Zionists did. And of course, they did it in the name of Judaism. And so they came and they took over the land. Now people started asking questions around the world. What's going on there? The Holy Land, why is there turmoil? What's the strife? What's happening? We were living for hundreds of years. So Jews, Muslims, Christians, what's going on? So the Zionists, unfortunately, as I say, they were very well connected to Britain and to the new creations of television, of radio, and all these new media outlets. They went to, and they had the connections with these media outlets, and they had the mic in their hands, the soul mic, and they spoke and they said, "Oh, it's a bunch of anti-Semites. These are Bedouins riding on camels, some backward nations people over there. It's really an empty land. It's a land without a people for a people without a land. It's nothing. What you're seeing there is just some people that just hate Jews, and they're stopping people from trying to settle their lives." So with that narrative, they went on and on and on and told the world that their settling in the land is a holy issue. It's from God. And the ones who are trying to stop them are just some backward people running around there. But that was totally false. So as the Jewish community, who are living together with the Muslims, with the Palestinians, our rabbis cried foul, and they said this is not us. They pleaded the chief rabbi at the time, the Zionists made a rabbinate and a chief rabbi.
Yeah.
All window dressing. But we had a rabbinate and a chief rabbi. His name was Rabbi Sonnenfeld in the 1910s, 1920s of blessed memory. And he met with the king of Transjordan. He specially went to meet him. And we have the pictures of that. And he put into Arab newspapers in Arabic that we want to be, we are loyal citizens. We want to be, we're not aspiring to take over the Al-Aqsa Mosque and all that. We have the writings in Arabic. He put in the Al-Salam newspaper at the time. When he passed on, the next chief rabbi was Rabbi Dushinsky. And this is in 1947 already. When the Zionists were almost there. They got the United Nations, which was already after the League of Nations, and was the United Nations. And the United Nations sent a delegate to see what was the story in Palestine, and they were seeing if they should give the Jewish people their homeland. Of course, it's Zionist, but the way they sold the narrative. So the chief rabbi, Rabbi Dushinsky, who was the head of the real Jewish community that were living there, he pleaded with the delegation of the United Nations, and this is in July 16th, 1947, and he said, "We furthermore wish to express our definite opposition to a Jewish state in any part of Palestine.
Wow.
We don't want this." And then on and on. He passed on. We took up another chief rabbi. You can see the thousands and tens of thousands of Jews gathering in the streets of Jerusalem.
Wow.
Because the community flourished. The community is there, and the community around the world, invariably, the very religious communities. I'm from New York, Williamsburg, Brooklyn, that's right across from Manhattan. There's not one single Israeli flag. It's the largest concentration of religious Jews outside of Jerusalem. But if you go to Montreal, you go to London, you go to any place where there's the very religious communities, because they're very religious, we are in total opposition, not only to what's happening in Gaza, the mass slaughter now that's happening, but the existence of a so-called Jewish state is anathema, is antithetical to our religion, because our religion is to serve God, not to kill, not to steal, to be subservient, and to show gratitude to people who did us kindness, like the Palestinians and the Muslims around the world. And here the Zionists create a state that's against, we're not allowed to have our own sovereignty. They're a bunch of heretics, and they're doing it by vilifying the people of Palestine, by calling them anti-Semites, and simply demonizing them and claiming that they're evil people, when these were our neighbors, friends. We will live together in total harmony, and there's no reason for this. It's simply because they are trying to create a selfish, flawed national home, their ideology, and has nothing to do with religions. It's the three religions live together. I always show this picture. This is when they made the state. David Ben Gurion reading the Declaration of Independence in 1948 in Independence Hall. So this is the historic moment when they're declaring the state. Here is stars of David on the wall, picture of Theodor Herzl not covering his head behind you.
Yeah.
So don't think it's a religious beard he has. And here, sitting on the dais, there's not one person, I think, covering his head. This is a Jewish state. You think you'd have one rabbi there? Somebody, a Jew covers his head to show that he believes a God is above us. It's a requirement of the Torah. Wow. This is the Jewish state that they're declaring, the Declaration of Independence, mind you. So you can see the total hypocrisy, the falsehood, and the difference between what Judaism is and what Zionism is and what the state is. So this is a sad history. From day one, Jews have opposed entirely the existence of the state. Our rabbis have cried and pleaded with the world that they should be listened to, just like you respect the Pope. Or somebody from any religion, why don't you respect the Jewish community that was living in Palestine, or the Jews around the world who are the Jewish religion? All of us clearly state that this is a farce, this is a falsification of our religion, and it should not be given legitimacy. But unfortunately, Zionism had the ears of Britain, later of the United Nations, which we believe it's the works of the Satan. It doesn't make any sense. They were ratified in 1948, and since then, and even before then, our rabbis have been demonstrating in the streets. Boys and girls, first of all, do not serve in their army from our religious communities, because we don't want to help them. And they get arrested. Every boy and girl turns 17 becomes a criminal, because it's a mandatory military service, and we refuse to serve in their army. Here, you see, they brutally beat. It's not only the police, it's the army, children. And why? We're not carrying guns. They accuse the Palestinians of terrorism, which is of course, most of it false. What we're talking about, us, we never carry a gun or a knife. In 75 years, they can't accuse one of us doing that. Here, you see children, old men, they trample, they assassinate, they beat, they arrest, on and on and on. You see, this is the police. It's not the police, it's the military, it's the army, together with their police. And if this would happen in any country around the world, they would be screaming anti-Semitism, anti-Semitism. And they're doing this daily to the Jews. I believe a few weeks ago, when we went out to demonstrate, it went viral, showing Orthodox Jews being beaten because they were demonstrating against the existence of the state. I say, these are all with this thousands and thousands of these pictures. Here they're spraying them with stink water that destroys their clothes. Stop the Zionist terrorist massacre in Gaza. These are in the Mea Shearim, the Jewish quarters in Jerusalem, the religious quarters, and so forth. You see this, they have paint, they have the Palestinian flag on the building. So this is basically what it's all about. We demonstrate from day one constantly. And now when it's happening, this massacre in Gaza, we cry. There's not a day that doesn't go since it's over 60 days that we're demonstrating in the streets tirelessly in front of the United Nations, in London, in Jerusalem. Unfortunately, they went demonstrating, but they're brutally beaten when they go demonstrate. But we go out, there would be tens of thousands more demonstrating if it wouldn't be for the vicious attacks of the Zionists even around the world. We went out and our car tires were slashed, our the cars keyed, mirrored, broken, and so forth. And we get death threats, but we go out and demonstrate. There would be tens of thousands more, but we go out and demonstrate, and we hurt and feel. Now with the Gaza, we beg and plead with the leaders of the world that it's 75 years you went lockstep with the Zionists. You listened to them. You bought their narrative. What has that brought? More death, more suffering of the Palestinian, tens of thousands of people murdered, but also Jews. Besides what the Zionists murder and oppress and assassinate from our rabbis, but even the ones that are in their support, what has brought this issue, the creation of the state of Israel? It has brought that you go to their cemeteries where their soldiers are buried, you have tens of thousands buried. Why? Because they're trying to implement a nationalist home called Israel. Why is it necessary when we were living together, Jews and Muslims and Christians? So it's only the implementation of this that's causing death. And let me just finish with this very one little thought before they keep on attacking everybody today as anti-Semitic. Again, remember, it's insulting the intelligence of a base of any human being, because till they came around a little over 100 years, not 75, a little over 100 years, Jews were living in every Arab land, and we were living in Palestine. We people of the Arab and Muslim community and Jewish community will attest how we lived together. What changed? One thing changed: Zionism. Since Zionism came, there's death and suffering. So what is the root cause of all the bloodshed and the hate that's growing around the world, that they're yelling that this anti-Semitism is growing? Purely the occupation. So they are the cause. They are the personification of anti-Semitism and the cause of exacerbation of anti-Semitism. And how dare they accuse these beautiful people of Gaza, who are our neighbors and friends? They dehumanize them. They demonize them and dehumanize them, that it's able to bomb day in and day out and kill, and the world is silent. We plead with the world. 75 years you bought into their narrative. Respect us. We hear what the Jews are saying. Hear what the Muslims, but everybody is yelling that it's nothing. It's not a religious conflict. It's a movement that's flawed. And look, 1,200 people were just murdered, and we're not condoning the violence, but it's a shock. Since Hitler, that didn't happen. Why did that happen? Not because of the difference of religion, because of this implementation of the state. So that should say enough. But that's not enough. So they're killing tens of thousands of Muslims there and Christians there in Gaza. They're dying. They're not dying. They're murdered. They're pulverized. And the world is saying we continue buying what the Zionists are saying and let people be murdered like ants. This is incomprehensible and unacceptable.
That was a great presentation, a great summary of the situation from a religious perspective, and how Zionism is essentially an offshoot of nationalism, basically in a new form. I want to go back to this extremely important law that the Jews shall not go back into Israel and establish a state. Should not go back into the Holy Land, I should say, in mass, and establish a state. So this is based on the Song of Solomon. Is that correct?
It's in the Shir HaShirim, a Song of Songs. It's called the Book of Solomon. Yeah, okay. He wrote it's a prophecy, a book of prophecy. It's considered the highest of prophecy. And in that book, he wrote, and it's written as a metaphor.
Yeah.
And it's explained in the Talmud because it's exactly explained in what it means.
Okay, good. So it's a prophecy of Solomon himself.
Yes.
And the reason I'm asking this question is that when I looked it up, I saw something that was not explicit, and it, as you said, it's in metaphor. The verse says, "Women of Jerusalem, take an oath and make me a promise. Let the antelopes and the doves serve as a witness. Don't stir up love. Don't wake up until it's ready." The other women say, "Who is this man coming up from the desert like a column of smoke? He smells like myrrh and incense from all the spices of the trader. Look, there's Solomon's movable throne, 60 soldiers accompany it." So when I looked this up, I said, hold on a second. I expected an oath, and now I have a poem about women of Jerusalem, don't stir up your love. Now, so I know in an Islamic context, when we say that there is a law from God, we expect explicit terms.
Right.
That cannot be equivocal, understood in two different ways.
Right.
So my question to you is this verse right here, is it agreed upon that it means these three oaths, or is the metaphoric nature a way for modern orthodoxy, some of these modern Orthodox, or some of these others to wiggle around and say, no, it's just a poem from Solomon?
Well, that's why I think I prefaced the whole, at the beginning, I said that the Torah was given to Moses, the 5 books of Moses with 613 commandments. If you do not accept that Moses took from God orally, which is called the written Torah and the oral Torah, it's all one, but there's the written and the oral part. If you do not accept the oral, you are not a practicing Jew. You can translate what you want into the Torah and say what you like. For instance, in the Torah it says an eye for an eye. Yeah. According to Jewish belief, it totally doesn't mean an eye for an eye. It means the cost of an eye you pay. Now, anybody who say, no, well, I'm only expecting an eye, I'm just following the Torah. I don't have to follow. If he says that, he's not a practicing Jew. He can do what he wants. I can't stop him. I mean, he can't do what he wants, because if he's from Jewish origin, he has to follow the Torah. But what he's saying, it doesn't mean anything. Like, there were the Krites, the Tzedokim, there were people who also didn't accept the written law, but they were cut off from Judaism right away. I mean, because if somebody does, so our Torah is not, it's not bendable, it's not pliable. We have to be pliable to the Torah. We have to conform ourselves to the Torah. The Torah doesn't conform to us. And that's what orthodoxy means. So basically, no, there is no question about what the three oaths. It says 3 times the same verse. One is a slightly different of the verse that you mentioned. I put you on the oath, daughters of Jerusalem, with the deer in the buck of the field. If you will awaken my love prematurely. That verse that you said. So that rabbis tell us in the Talmud that it says 3 times because God put the Jews under 3 oaths. One, that we should not return en masse, not to awaken my love. The daughters of Jerusalem, meaning the Jewish people. If I put you on the oath not to awaken my love prematurely. It's speaking about God is speaking to the Jewish people. Do not awaken my love prematurely by leaving exile and returning. One, not en masse, not rebelling against any country, and not to make any attempts to end exile. And that is clear across the board. All Jewish people accepted till the advent recently of whatever Zionism. Now there was sometimes people question the rabbis if we can leave exile even to Maimonides, Moses, the people of Yemen, and he wrote them, of course, Igeres Teman. He wrote to them a letter and explaining we are in exile. The Maharal of Prague, a very famous rabbi in Prague, Czechoslovakia, is buried there a few hundred years ago, also wrote about, he said that we have to give our lives rather than disobey these oaths. And all across the board, every Jew knew that we had the opportunities throughout our history. Although we went through the Inquisitions, there were times that there was called the Golden Age of Jews. There were times that Jews were able to afford to buy a piece of land, yet we never did this because we are in exile, and that's a fast and by us the law, and nobody disagrees with that. Now, you can ask, how come then there are people amongst Zionists who they call themselves religious and they have rabbis and chief. How do they get around all of these issues? Mostly, it's not that they try. There are some, like you're saying, they say, oh, they don't have to obey this, which is pure blasphemy. Somebody who doesn't accept the law, the teachings of Moses, or that you can bend any of that teaching. But there are others. I give the example. The Talmud states that we're not allowed to eat bugs or worms. It's just like we're not allowed to eat a pig. So the Talmud says I can prove 150 ways why it's permissible to eat the bug or worm. But the Talmud is telling us, in other words, it's not permissible. Totally not. It's like you can't eat a pig. You can't. Everybody knows that. But still in all, I could prove. If I would like to twist the words, we can prove to you that it's kosher. So in other words, a good lawyer could take somebody off the gallows, they want so they have the ways of trying to explain the Zionists. Now let us understand, as I was showing to you, the Zionist movement, they were opposed by the rabbinical authorities around the world. Everyone, 130 years of religious opposition to Zionism. So we have the leading rabbis, besides tens of thousands of rabbis who oppose us, but we have these other leading rabbis around the world, each one in their style, how they spoke up against Zionism. This is already today, will be 140, 150 years. Some of them, many of them passed away before the state of Israel, but Zionism came from Europe, and they opposed this. But rabbis, not only from Europe, from the Sephardic lands, from Jerusalem, from Iraq, from wherever it may be, they all spoke up against this movement. So one of the great, I give this example because he was a codifier of Jewish law, just like Maimonides in his time. And later, one of the very accepted codifiers of Jewish law and that concisely put it together was called the Chafetz Chaim, Rabbi Yisroel Dovid, who passed away from Mizrahi in 1933. That was like 15 years before the state of Israel, but it was well into the establishment of Zionism. So he said, the Zionists are dead limbs of our people, which causes the entire body to rot. So in other words, it's a growth on the body that causes the entire body to rot. So basically, that was just one example. But anyway, they were all in steadfast and total opposition to this concept of Zionism. Yet, so this is clear. The Zionists were ostracized at the beginning. Later, unfortunately, after the World War II, where millions of Jews were killed, and mostly it was the leaders that were the first to be murdered. And Stalin, his name should be obliterated, also murdered and sent to Siberia the ones who were teachers of Jews. So we were leaderless to a certain degree. Thank God, God left us with his compassion a few great rabbis to lead us, not to fall into the hands of Zionism. But Zionists were able to make a foothold, get a foothold, especially in Palestine, after the destruction that happened. The 6 million Jews, amongst them my grandparents and many of my relatives, the majority of my relatives in Poland and in Hungary, where my parents came from. So the Zionists, and especially, they were able to gain foothold because they were given by Britain rights in the Holy Land in Palestine, and then of course by the United Nations. So they were able to use that power and the fact that Jews suffered so much and they were left a generation of orphans, that they were able to sell them. You see what happens? You didn't have the and they vilified the Muslims, so they were able to solidify that. So now what they did was this group of heretics, they were able to, they tried to incorporate the religion by making a rabbinate and a chief rabbi. They got a few rotten apples, basically. Knowledgeable people, scholars, Avad Yosef, this one, that one, Cook. They were able to get people who are scholars, but unfortunately, who were evil, basically. And they became the chief rabbis, and they were able to sell. Now, what did they do? So what did they do with these 3 oaths, for instance? That's a problem for them. So they use one of the concepts they use. They say, God also put the nations on the oath not to oppress the Jews in exile. It's enough of the suffering in exile. We are not to oppress them. And being that we are so oppressed by the nations, that nullifies and negates the oaths that the Jews are under. Now, that's not true. But that is one of the Zionist ploy of explaining to their people why they're able to create a state. And of course, they use whatever, just an example that I can give, that they try to, so they use the concept of with the beginning of redemption, God's redemption, and the yearning that Jews have to return there, and the vilification of the Muslims, like I say, and fear mongering that, wow, the Nazis just murdered us. Now, if you can, the Arabs, just like the Nazis, and they're actually affiliated, the Mufti was affiliated with Hitler, they're going to want to murder every Jew. And so you have to save your life. So you have to protect yourself, and therefore you should have that. So you use fear mongering and in total, it's a system of a ploy, using the Holocaust and propaganda and this and that. But it's all evil. It's unacceptable. And the Jewish communities around the world, true to the religion, plead with the Jews and the non-Jews to understand and hear that they're being misled. It's by a corrupt group, and it's not Judaism. We're forbidden to occupy, we're forbidden to steal. Even if they're suffering, you have no right to take the land of another people. You can't steal. And so it's all wrong. It's all wrong. And we cry and hurt with the people of Gaza.
Let me ask you another question now. Time has passed now. It must be very tempting for a religious rabbi and a student of the Torah to have his own country now. So question is now, how many of the Orthodox and Hasidic Jews and these communities have bought into this alteration of the oath that Obadiah Yosef and those others have sort of preached? And as you said, he's a big scholar and respected, so many people may say, well, look, if he says it, then that must be the right ruling. Right. And so has Orthodoxy began to change its opinion on these three oaths and buy into that? What would you say is the percentage?
Right. Well, with the help of the Almighty, first of all, I'm not even sure if Avad Yosef buys into that claim, because he was a wild guy, by the way. Yeah. People knew him. He actually came. His rabbis were anti-Zionist, by the way. And he came from, but his style was wild, and so like sometimes he would say some anti-Zionist things, and then he would jump, and he became, of course, the chief rabbi. So whatever he said is mute. Is just is no. It's not, doesn't matter, because he's carrying the position of a chief rabbi of theirs. But so he had different reasons. Whatever he did, trying to condone, and which he used a lot when he tried to condone their occupation, was because of the dangers that was imminent from the Arabs. Cook was the father of the first chief rabbi, and he was the one who was really on the establishment of the state that he was condoning. But now, that said, usually you will find across the board, and this is, you go to any area around the world, the very religious communities, the Hasidim, usually are anti-Zionist. I mean, that's wherever you go, the United States, like I say, or you go to the Israeli
even Lakewood, New Jersey.
Lakewood, New Jersey, they're anti-Zionist. As if you won't see Israeli flags there. I mean, you may find one or two there. You never can know. Somebody can always, they always find that revolutionary, guy who wants to or stick it to somebody, to show that I can, But the wise guys are there. But the community, definitely, they are anti-Zionist. I mean, we know their rabbis. They were the chief, like dean of the whole school that started the whole Lakewood community. These were strongly anti-Zionist, God-fearing people.
How about the modern Orthodox, your Ben Shapiros, your Harvard and Yale Orthodox Jews?
Right. So unfortunately, the more it goes on that slippery slope, the more the modern, what they call modern Orthodox, is a euphemism for compromised Judaism. Modern Orthodox. What does it mean, modern Orthodox? Like I said, we conform ourselves to the religion, whatever year we're in, whatever the change in time, we have to conform and stay true and fast to the letter of the law of the Torah. That's what Judaism is. Yeah. But modern means, they dress usually, they don't dress modestly, the women, like they're supposed to, according to the Jew. And their modern means really a compromised Judaism in every aspect when it comes to the issues of kosher food. And they're studying, they're learning in the schools. Won't be like Lakewood, where it's concentrated religious learning day and night. They would have in the modern, they teach they spend many hours of other subjects that they're studying, rather than studying the Torah as a mainstay, almost the whole day, and learning, just what's necessary, absolutely necessary, because that's what Judaism is, to be a people, to be God required of us to be a nation of priests, so we have to be constantly studying the Torah. And so they're usually really lacking in the knowledge of the Torah, a lot of them. Some of them are scholars. I'm not taking away that they're not scholars, but unfortunately, in practice, they are totally compromised. That's what's modern Orthodox. So from them, you will find what's called Mizrahi, the movement that started religious Zionism. And that's where you will find the settlers come from, either from religious homes or from modern Orthodox.
So the word Mizrahi means religious Zionists.
It doesn't mean, Mizrahi does not mean that, but that's the group that they gave themselves that name.
I see, okay.
Mizrahi for the religious Zionists at the beginning of Zionism.
Okay.
So you will find these are the ones who are supportive of Israel and will march in the Israeli Independence Day parade. If everybody goes there to the Israeli Independence Day parade, which we go religiously every year on the side, not with them, but opposing them. We demonstrate against them. But when we go, you will never find really religious schools marching with them. You will find the ones who are marching with them are non-religious, and have women singing, which is forbidden by the Jewish law for men to hear women singing. They'll do anything that they don't really, they dress totally immodestly, and they have these schools. They'll have from modern day schools, they'll have from schools children who come from these modern, but not from the very religious, because across the board, wherever you will find the very religious, it's totally contradictory, our religion, to Zionism.
Yeah.
The killing of the Arabs, the killing, the vilification of the people of Gaza and the Palestine, this creation of a state, everything in every aspect. Besides which, we didn't even talk about how they tried, the state of Israel, to destruct Judaism by anything that has to do with Judaism. For instance, they tried to put an Olympic pool right in the center of the holiest part of where the Jewish people live in Mea Sharm, that area of Jerusalem, because they want to undermine, and break the backbone of the religious communities. They dig up graves for archaeological study, even though according to the Torah we're forbidden. It's forbidden for us to do that.
Yeah.
And we have people who die for that. We have our people run to the cemeteries around, because they have people buried from 2,000 and 3,000 years of Jews, so they know the exact dating of bodies. So it's a boon for the archaeologists. And the government stands there with their guns to protect them, and our people jump into the holes and fight them from digging up the graves. They dig up, they destroy cemeteries to make highways, hotels, and no respect for the dead. While in Egypt, I went to Egypt, they made a ring road in order not to destroy a Jewish cemetery. For millions and millions of dollars, they built it on pillars that they shouldn't disturb a Jewish cemetery. They had to make a ring road because of the traffic in Cairo. So they made a very famous ring road, and it was a tremendous Jewish cemetery. So they built. Nobody talks about that. But the Israelis, they made Kavush 6, they made an extension of the highway, right? They ran it through a Jewish cemetery. So we're dealing with the corrupt and evil. But you ask in the modern Orthodox, so it's when you see settlers, you're always seeing religious, or what they call the government today, extreme right. Who are these guys?
Yeah.
People keep on seeing them. They think, wow, so many religious people. No, very religious communities. Where you live, you're in the United States, come to New York, come to Brooklyn, see for yourself. Go to Lakewood, go to the very religious communities are not Zionists. Not everybody will be so vocal like we are because of the fear of the intimidation, the attacks, but they are anti-Zionist. This is clear. The Lakewood leadership over there, they are students of great rabbis, anti-Zionist, clearly anti-Zionist, and work together with the chief rabbi of Palestine, Rabbi Teitelbaum of blessed memory, fighters against Zionism.
What is a Haredi? What is the Haredi sect or group? What does that term refer to?
Chared means fear. Chared means to fear. Haredi means God-fearing. It's the same thing like Orthodox. It's the same thing. They usually call the Haredi the ones who are God-fearing. They like to always give us some, a degrading task, and they say the ultra-Orthodox or the extreme.
Okay. So it's not a different theology.
No, totally not.
Okay, Chabad.
Chabad. Oh, that's a problematic area.
Okay.
Chabad. we have our writings of the Chabad rabbis. Chabad was one of the a student of Baal Shem Tov had a student called the Maggid Mizrich. Mizrich was a city, a town, and Dover, and he had one of his students was the first Chabad Rebbe. Chabad is an acronym for Chachma Bina Das. It means knowledge, wisdom, and basically. So, and that's the name given to that group. Lubavitch, either Lubavitch is the name of the town where a lot of times the rabbis, the customs of groups, they're named after the towns where they come from. So
Chabad and Lubavitch are
the same.
Same thing. Okay.
Chabad is the name, the acronym that they give to what they Chachma Bina Das, like this, knowledge. But the town where they came from, the rabbis, was Lubavitch. So it's actually 7 generations that they had of Lubavitcher Rebbe's, and the first ones were well before Zionism, but the last 4 were in the period of Zionism. That's 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So the 3 prior to the last one were very strongly anti-Zionist and wrote the most eloquent and the most strongest languages we have from them of against Zionism. And it's quoted now a book again. The rabbis speak out. The most sharply spoken people against Zionism were the people of here. Rabbi Yisroel Dovid Schneerson, because that's the name of the family. Schneerson was he was from 1866 to 1920. 1920. So he was in the time period of Zionism, and we have many of his quotes against Zionism. He was very strongly anti-Zionist. He said, "We strongly oppose Zionism for religious reasons and for the sake of peace with our country. In the name of God and the name of the Holy Torah, we warn our brethren, all have the fear of God in their hearts, to separate from the doctrine of Zionism entirely and to avoid their company." So I'm saying the sharpness of the language against Zionism.
Yeah.
Now, the last rabbi was a son-in-law of the one previous to him, also came from that dynasty of Schneersons, of that family. And they took him up to be the rabbi in the United States.
This is the big one.
The one who was well known, Mendel Schneerson.
Yeah.
Now, he unfortunately was a very controversial person. He never declared himself a Zionist. He never went to visit Israel, mind you. But he was controversial, and in many issues we consider it like a cult. And it's a whole issue by itself. There's books written about this, and many things that he did that the other rabbis felt very uncomfortable with. In fact, many of his followers consider that he didn't even die, although he died like I don't know how many years ago, 40 years ago, whatever it may be. So some of them believe that he's still alive. And it's very controversial.
That's why I see his pictures everywhere. Yeah. In certain part, where do they live, the Lubavitch?
Well, their base is in Crown Heights.
Crown Heights. And when you go there, you see this certain man's picture everywhere.
Right. So we find that very troublesome because now it's considered like idolatry to a certain manner. We feel that they're sort of veering off, and we had problems while he was still alive.
Yeah.
He never considered himself a Zionist, and his very religious, knowledgeable followers insist that he was a very strong anti-Zionist. But as far as we're concerned, he condoned the Israeli armies to go and fight because he said for protection and so forth. And our rabbis considered him very off
the track.
And so Chabad, unfortunately, there are, mind you, from Chabad groups that are very strongly anti-Zionist, and they left that group because of that. One of the reasons, I mean, like I say, there's many problems with that group, but unfortunately, they're very well known. They go around but it's like a cult. We have a cult problem with them. And he didn't advocate Zionism, but he said because we have to protect ourselves, and we found this very troublesome. We found him very troublesome, and he was really basically not accepted in our world. Sort of Orthodox
of Hasidim, So he was basically maybe just like for the Crown Heights population was their leader,
he's very well known around the world because his system was, and it wasn't just his system. He followed in the footsteps of his father and so forth. That they should send people out to the world to be able to bring them back to Judaism, people who left Judaism. So they're very known, just like the settlers. You always see them because they're in your face. They're by the settlements. So you think, wow, I'm always seeing these religious guys when they're only the peripheral. They're coming. They're not the mainstream of the religious Jews. They're just this group that coming from either non-religious or marginally religious, and they're idealists. They go on hilltops and they put their children in danger. What gives them the right to do it? But these have come because the idealists who are following in the Zionist propaganda, but not the very religious who do this. Now you go in regard to the Lubavitch, he sends his people out to go around the world to everywhere we find there's a community. They send them out, to try to establish, they call a Chabad house, to try to bring them back supposedly to religion. But unfortunately, they try to bring them to Lubavitch. I tell you, we find it's like a cult and very troublesome. And we find that many of them, because they're not knowledgeable and they follow in this thing that he said that they need protection, that even though it totally contradicts to be anti-Zionist, they play along with that. There are from them who aren't like that, mind you. There are from them who will say, yes, we understand that it's wrong, and they are not Zionists. But unfortunately, a lot of them, a lot of them are simply ignorant of the Torah altogether. That they send them around. They just send so many people around that they don't have enough quality of the people to know the Torah properly.
All right, let's see if we can have one or two questions here. Okay, Kivum, what is this? Kiruv? Is this also a preaching movement? A repentance preaching movement?
Kiruv means to help people return. Kiruv means to bring close, to help people return to the Judaism who don't know. Unfortunately, like I say, Reform destroyed Judaism before Zionism came, that they make people believe they could be good Jews even if they're not practicing religion. Kiruv comes along and tries to go to these people who are non-religious and try to bring them back to religion. So, and Lubavitch is busy with Kiruv.
So is every Kiruv part of Lubavitch?
No, not at all. There are many people who are serious rabbis and and they're just good Jews who go and they feel they see a Jew who's not practicing. We believe that every Jew has to keep the laws of the Torah. If they're born from a Jewish mother, that's what goes by the mother's side. If they're born from a Jewish mother, they are Jewish and they are required to keep all the commandments. So we try to, we meet the Jew, we try to talk to them, to bring them back that they should follow the laws of the Torah, not to be a Zionist, not to kill, not to steal, and to keep Sabbath and keep kosher. And that's called Kiruv. So many people try to do that.
Okay, here's another question. Monsey, New York has a Jewish community. Can you tell us about their politics with regard to Zionism?
Well, Monsey, thank God, I live in Monsey, and you will hardly see an Israeli flag if you will see any in Monsey. You can drive miles and miles up and down. And that's because, as a general rule, it's a very Orthodox. It's pretty much all very Orthodox. It started as a very, there were non-religious and marginally religious, but more and more religious people moved in through the years, and it became a lot of religious Jews, and therefore you will find there used to be a synagogue that had a flag on it. There was a school that had a flag on it. They disappeared, and so you will find in Monsey that mostly non-Zionists there, and some who are very actively against Zionism, but most people are just, like I say, people are very reluctant to go out and speak, but they're not Zionists. You don't, because it would be then you would see full of flags all over. There was just a case actually in Ramapo Township, which is the township of Monsey. They decided to put up a flag there, and many people complained, and somebody actually took it off, and there's a whole issue there because people complain. Who gives you the right? Because they found some Zionists to put it up on the court steps. It's a government thing, but it's like I say, the community you will find to be, I think, as a majority anti-Zionist.
Okay,
I'm quite sure, because the schools, if you will follow the schools, all the very religious schools here, they're all anti-Zionist.
Yeah. A couple more. One more question we'll take. Okay, here's a very simple question. the origins of Zionism are atheists, essentially. First part of the question is it actually true that Herzl and Ben Gurion and Golda Meir were actually atheists? We know that they were not practicing Jews, but they were actually atheists. If so, do they simply view the Bible as a historical record? Why would they care at all about the Bible in the first place?
That's a very good question. But let me just go back to the list because I like to be, exacting and true. I said that you won't find any school that's Zionist. I'm sure there is somewhere. There possibly is a school, but as almost entirely all the schools that we know, the religious schools around here are anti-Zionist. But again, you may find somewhere something. Okay, now that said, yes, you're asking a very good question. Theodor Herzl, now we put out a book, Traditional Torah, Opposition to Zionism, Historical Documents. One of the many documents we have in Arabic, we have some documents that the rabbis sent to the Arabic newspapers, the anti-Zionists, and then we have quotes of the Zionists. So Theodor Herzl wrote in his own diary, page 14, and we're quoting him, he said, the way to solve the problem of anti-Semitism is to speak to the head priest of Vienna, to get an appointment with the Pope, to make a mass conversion of all the Jews of Austria to Catholicism.
Wow.
This is the father of Zionism. The solution to anti-Semitism is to have all the Jews converted of Austria to Catholicism. It should be done on a Sunday in the middle of the day with music and pride publicly. We are the last generation that held on to the faith of our forefathers. The conversion will be in St. Stephen's Cathedral. Imagine what we're talking here. This is the father of the hero of this is, and he says they should convert, and his children did convert out of the religion.
Wow.
Jabotinsky was the founder of revisionist Zionism. He was the mentor of Menachem Begin, who was one of the prime ministers. He wrote in the newspaper, Haaretz newspaper, in 1919 already then, he wrote, in the national home we will announce that those Jews who have on themselves the rust of exile and they refuse to shave off their beards and earlocks will be second-class citizens and not have the right to vote.
Wow.
Imagine making a Jewish state. Some rabbi used to quote this, and he said, tell me, he would ask, who said this? So this guy would say, the Nazi Hitler said it. No, he's not the Zionists. So you're just giving you an idea. Well, why they use the Bible? Very simply, because they're not religious. They don't have morals of God. They don't care that they're falsifying. They don't care. They have no compunctions to take the Star of David or use Maccabees. It's now the holiday of Lights, Hanukkah. The Maccabees were the children of the high priest that went out and fought against the Greeks. They were a handful of people, 5 people against thousands, tens of hundreds of thousands of soldiers. And they actually, the Jews were paying, they were under the Greeks at the time by the Second Temple, and they were paying a fortune of taxes. And what happened was that they paid, they didn't revolt. But then the Greeks put out a decree that Jews can't keep the Sabbath, can't do circumcision. So they were ready to give their lives for this. The Jews ready to give their lives for it. So they went out, these old men, most probably the Maccabees, Matzio was Kohen Gadol, the high priest, and his and his children, and they went out, these 5, and they had a sword and a shield, and on the shield they had an acronym, Mi Kamocha Be'el Hashem, who is strong like you, God. And with that they went, and God made a miracle, and they were able to be victorious against all these soldiers, and they found a bottle of oil, and it burned for 8 days, whatever it was. And we celebrate, it's called the Holiday of Lights. We celebrate the issue of lights, of purity, of serving God in the temple. While the Zionists have the picture of the Maccabees and the Olympic team and the Maccabees, nothing to do with godliness, as if their army is the Maccabees. Yes. They misconstrue, they use the Torah, everything simply as a tool to intimidate others, that people should not stand up against them or else they'll attack as anti-Semitic. They use, instead of using the stories of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the Maccabees, and all the issues as holiness and how to serve God, they use it as a nationalism. And so everything gets twisted and destroyed, and they destroy the whole soul of Judaism. So for us, it's a nakba, what they're doing to the Palestinians and what they're doing in our name. It's a double nakba. And thirdly, they're destroying the souls of Jews by uprooting what it means to be a Jew, to an ersatz Judaism, a shell of simply a nationalism. So it's for us the worst tumor and cancer. God should bring a peaceful and speedy the dismantlement, the removal of this terrible, terrible
Yeah.
tragedy, this colossal tragedy, and nowadays soon.
Well, I really appreciate your time. I think we both share a hatred of reformists in our respective religions, because we have our own share of them, and also deem them to be really the source of all problems. Who needs enemies when you have reformists in your own religion?
Well,
And liberals and people who are have no respect for your book, yet try to fight for your cause. So
Well,
we have
yeah.
so much of that. I see so much of the commonalities between, you know, what you're saying and a lot of the conversations we have amongst ourselves as well with those types.
Yeah, well, I would say, I would ask you if you can see to get the word. I appreciate you having me on the program. If you can
Yep.
spread the word, and especially the people of Gaza, the people of that we, Jewish religious people around the world, we're crying and hurting with them. It's not Judaism. It's not the religion. It's not the Jews who are true to religion. We hurt and cry with them. Mind you, there's so many other Jews who simply what they call human rights, they're standing up for them. But we as the Jewish religion and Judaism, we are crying and hurting because what we people call human rights, we call godliness.
Yeah.
So we are crying and hurting with them. And we pray every day that, you know, that God should bring a speedy and peaceful, total dismantlement of the state. Of course, it hurts us. The 1,200 children, I mean, not children, the people who are killed because that brought it, not that they say brought about the attack. But we say, who are you fooling? It's Zionism that brought it. This is God should help. We should end this occupation entirely. We can embrace the people of Palestine. Here's back your home, a free Palestine. And God help. We should come to the day when all humanity will recognize one God and serve Him in harmony sooner nowadays.
You mentioned a number of books. Do you have a website where people could get those books?
Well, NKUSA, yeah, I believe it's on my site. This should be here on www.nkusa. Let me. I'm trying to look for something that has a more clear picture of a site on it. I don't know if you see because it's in red, this one, but it's www.nk for Neturei Kartas, www.
Okay, I see it here.
NKUSA. If you can put it up on your site, I appreciate it.
Very good. I see it here. Good.
Yeah, here's well, on the bottom here it says our site, Jews United, www.nkusa.org.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, I see it here. So all those books that you mentioned, they can be found here, correct?
With God's help, yeah.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. There are a lot of comments saying they have a lot of respect for your honesty regarding the your sticking to your text and the courage that you have speaking out against those who are breaking the laws of your text. And people who are consistent in things, they tend to like others who are consistent, you know, in their principles and their beliefs. So I think we resonated a lot with that.
Thank you.
Thank you again for your time, and perhaps in the future we'll have you on again.
Thank you.
Appreciate it again. Thank you very much. Thank you. There you have, everyone. Was a lot more detail than I expected, and it was amazing detail. It was really good insights that he brought. A very crystal clear and simple understanding of how Zionism is something completely different from Judaism. It's in fact a nationalization of a religious people. You have a people who have a religion, you're transforming it into a nationalism, and it's an imitation of the Europeans, right? That's essentially what it is. The Europeans are the ones who raised up nationalism. Even it wasn't a thing for Muslims either, right? Muslims didn't believe in any of these borders and nationalism. We had a deen, and we didn't have a lot of these borders. So as Muslims have imitated and become nationalists, likewise in the Jewish community were those who became nationalists. And they left off their book and followed and sought to imitate the Europeans. And essentially Zionism are, as he said, imitators of Europeans, right? To the exclusion of their law and disrespect of their book and their scholars. So you're going to see a lot. And I just saw couple videos this morning. IDF soldiers, no respect for their elders of the religious people. These religious scholars walking around and religious students of knowledge get pushed around and bullied all the time by the IDF. At first I was like, wait, what's going on here? I don't understand. Why are they going after their own people? And you realize, oh, It's actually quite easy to understand once we have the analogy to our own reform types, our own Islamic so-called Muslim countries who despise the scholars, right? And then when you have people out there and they're worried about places like, oh, Egypt and Saudi and they're going to bring Islam to the world. I'm like, they are the last people who are ever going to bring you any Islam in the world, right? They're the last. The sincere and honest scholars in those countries, okay, they'd love to put them all in jail and finish them all, but they can't. So they have to find some munafiq, some hypocrites, some weak-willed scholars, as he said, bad apples. It's the same exact thing in our countries. Find some bad apples, willing to compromise, willing to give a ruling that's completely against everything that everybody else knows, and have the nerve to come in with a turban and a beard or a kufi and a thobe and say, oh, here is the fatwa, and it's doing nothing but serving your government. Okay? Is every nation that wants to stuck with religion and doesn't want it has to find some bad apples to sign off. They have to. And that's what they do. And the people on the outside, they say, oh, they just see a monolith. The ignorant folk, they say, okay, the mufti said it's halal. Yeah, this is a mufti who's bought and sold. It's not a mufti that's respected in the circles of knowledge. And then from further out, non-Muslims, they say, oh, Saudi, they're coming to bring Islam. I'm telling you, if Saudi's the last people that you have to worry about. They're not interested in at all in the Sharia and in Islam, though that leadership class. Same we could say with Egypt. Egypt, the Sisi, he goes ballistic on one Islamic ruling, homosexuality. It's one thing that you can agree on. He despises it. Other than that, right? He's not someone who wants scholars walking around teaching knowledge. You're not allowed to. If you're a scholar, you're going to be watched. You're either going to be one of those who are giving him his loyalty, and you're going to say what he wants to be said and stop where he wants to stop. Or you're going to be monitored and checked, okay, and life made miserable and maybe even jailed. And the same used to go for Syria, was 10 times worse than Egypt. Egypt was an open country in comparison to Assad, Syria. And his son is, as we know what his son is, a complete destroyer of a nation. Okay? And his father, Hafid al-Assad, was one of the most virulent. This guy's not even a Muslim. He's from another sect completely outside of Islam. Despising of the scholars. And there was only a small period of time where the scholars had some peace in some small areas of the city, of the country. Iraq, Saddam Hussein, same thing. Every single Muslim country, pretty much you could say, used to be like that. Turkey now opened up recently. Malaysia also, they have a lot of freedoms. Okay, so those are the only two countries maybe you could say you could go there and live a good free life as a practicing Muslim and do what you want. Other than that, this live stream could never ever happen out of Cairo. We've been shut down a long time ago. Either you're going to be shut down or you're going to meet with the intelligence and with whoever department, and they're going to make sure that you're loyal to them and you're speaking their message. They're going to stay in touch with you to keep you on a tight leash. So, brothers and sisters, Jazakumullah khairan. Thank you all very much. Wonderful stream. We will see you next week. Monday, remember something else that we're streaming next week. Then next week we're in Umrah, so we're going to be off that week and we'll be back in January bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. Thank you all very much. Rabbi Yisroel Dovid is also in the what do they call that in the back? The back of the studio or backstage. Thank you again very much, and hopefully we could talk again soon. I'm glad we're in touch. Thank you all very much. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.